my name is Jacqueline.
My name is Michaela.
My name is Javier.
I'm Jamie.
And today we are going to be talking about how news outlets in the United States today distort or misrepresent certain complicated issues.
Now, for the sake of this presentation, we have decided to utilize the Collins English Dictionary's definition of the news, which per their wording can be defined as information that is published in newspapers and broadcast on radio, television about recent events in the country or world or in a particular area.
Within our research scope, we have decided to narrow down our individual findings to focus on three particular issues that biased news tend to misrepresent, which are A, illegal immigrants, B, the mentally ill, and C, sex crimes.
Now, as previously mentioned before, biased news outlets often tend to misrepresent illegal immigrants. It is no secret that this past decade has been a wild period of time with intense unresolved immigration issues, especially in the United States.
While some news sources do shed a positive light on the issue at hand, undocumented immigrants are often villainized and depicted as overly violent, much like our current administration states. For example, immigrants are frequently portrayed in detention facilities or in the custody of border security, an image that implies criminality. This narrow portrayal isn't one that just pops up occasionally, it's everywhere.
So while negative media portrayals of undocumented immigrants tend to affect the perception of immigration in the United States, reality is that immigrants, both legal and illegal, can be significantly less violent than native-born citizens. This presented chart, having been recently published from the Cato Institute in February, examines criminal conviction data for residents of Texas in 2015. It found that native-born residents were much more likely to be convicted of a crime than both legal and illegal immigrants. According to the data, for almost 6 native-born citizens who commit larceny, about 1 illegal immigrant was convicted of the same crime.
Wait. So you're telling me that a lot of news outlets have it wrong? Immigrants aren't the big bad wolves?
Well, yes, I am!
So then begs this other question. Does the news' negative portrayal of undocumented immigrants really have an impact? Again, the answer is yes. As psychologist Stephanie Freiberg once said, if the media links illegal immigrants with threats to public safety such as increased terrorist attack, crime rates, and diseases, then the media may inadvertently bias the public towards an anti-immigration stance. And her claim proves to be true. Recently, positive views of Mexico, a country well known for undocumented immigrants, have declined substantially in the United States. More specifically, data collected from a national survey and a Gallup poll indicated that in 2005, a total of 26 Americans viewed Mexico negatively. However, 7 years later, that number has increased by a whopping 29%. Big surprise. The news does influence public perception.
Another group of people that news outlets often fail to address appropriately is the mentally ill. Most news outlets have the bad habit of depicting individuals diagnosed with serious illnesses such as schizophrenia or bipolar disease as having higher risk for violent behavior. In fact, a 2013 national survey conducted by a series of epidemiologists found that after questioning hundreds of people, that 46% of Americans believed that seriously mentally ill people were far more dangerous than the general population. In corroborating accounts, data collected in 2006 from the General Social Survey found that 62% of the respondents perceived schizophrenics to be particularly frightening.
Contrary to popular belief, research shows that most people with mental illnesses are not as violent as they are portrayed to be. Data collected from the National Instant Criminal Check System indicated that in 2013, only 28% of federal gun disqualifying crimes were committed by an individual with a mental health record, a number that has remained low even in the late 20th century.
Wait. So basically, news outlets once again have misrepresented a group of people causing public disdain?
Yes, it did happen again.
So the news also has a history of twisting rape cases to be in favor of the alleged victims. And the way they do this, they do a couple things. They portray the accuser and the accused in very different lights. They omit the word alleged, and they're also very selective about what kind of evidence they use. So there's this one case that encompasses all of these different press failures. The Duplicross rape case, which happened in the early 2000s. So this right here is just one example of a news source that didn't use the word alleged when it really should have. In addition, when evidence in favor of the defendants came out, a lot of news sources, not all of them, but a fair amount of them, they just didn't cover that newfound information. And even the ones that did, a lot of those did two things. One, they waited a while to publish that information, and two, they didn't attribute that much attention to it. And this case had a lot of ramifications for everyone involved. The coach was fired, the season was canceled, the defendants themselves were facing death threats, they were being called privileged racists in the media. It's really bad news, and this is not, by a long shot, the first time the press has done this.
Just to recap the bigger idea, news outlets tend to distort certain complex issues, a trend that carries a lot of implications, such as xenophobia, stigmas, and even more bias.
The biggest consequence, however, is the development of this natural propensity to establish an us versus them dichotomy between one group of people and another. This tendency is one that often fuels public discourse and can ignite certain issues like racism, for example, in the case of illegal immigrants, political polarization, homophobia, you name it. So then arises another big question: what's the solution?
Our group has concluded that the best solution to this issue is to provide public funding for media content providers. This guarantees editorial independence to corporations so that they can focus on providing fact-driven articles and stories rather than having to worry about capturing the attention of an audience or funders through over-exaggerated titles.
Fortunately so, the solution is already in action. In the United States, a nonprofit entity created in 1967 and currently run by Congress assists the public funding of select news outlets. Today, it is recognized that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB, is what that entity is. Their main goal is to publicly fund news outlets. Interestingly so, 71% of direct funding received from the federal budget is directly sent to TV and public radio stations, while the remaining 29% in other gritty details. About 1,500 local public TV and radio stations in this country rely heavily on funding through CPB, PBS being most prominent.
Publicly funded TV programs like PBS have actually demonstrated to be more educational than what the private sector has to offer. More specifically, in a 2000 study regarding the effects of TV on children's ability to attend to educational tasks, a group of 62 kindergartners from Oklahoma were analyzed after watching particular movies. The first group, they were divided into 3 groups, so that the first group watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, an educational film. The second group watched Power Rangers, which is not an educational film. And the third group, the control group, didn't watch TV at all. It was concluded that all the children that watched Power Rangers subsequently had more trouble focusing on tasks and engaged more in horseplay. Since movies produced by media outlets like PBS do not have to be concerned about appeasing an audience to gain money through smoke and mirrors, most of their objectives are oriented more towards providing and informing an audience. In addition to being more educational and less emotion-oriented, publicly funded movies place an extensive amount of emphasis on this idea of appeasing to an all-inclusive audience, something that most news outlets refrain from doing.
While news sources like CNN and Fox are companies that cater to a specific targeted audience, publicly funded programs like PBS are not. This reluctance to indulge in political bias is a subject that has even been addressed by Pat Harrison, the president of the CPB, who once said, "CPB is committed to promoting greater innovation and diversity in public media. The development of publicly funded content will serve the need and interests of citizens of our increasingly diverse nation across a variety of platforms."
So really the big advantage of this solution is that news sources would, in theory, no longer have to rely on sensational headline stories being politically correct, and that would mean that they could be more rational and fact-based, and in theory that would be reflected in the public.
Although there exist several advantages to the publicly funded news outlets, there are also disadvantages. In this presentation, we will be addressing 2 main disadvantages. 1, how can public funds be equally distributed? And 2, what are the odds that the government can manipulate media content?
In total, the federal government provides around $445 million to the CPB each year, but retrospectively, CPB had a difficult time distributing funds equally amongst various stations. For example, in 2018, PBS received $14.6 million of public funding, while NPR received only $9.2 million from CPB. So who's to determine which media outlets get funded and how much they should be receiving?
So in the past, governments have also manipulated public funding in social media to their advantage. However, a study we looked at showed that this mostly has happened in Eastern Europe and the Middle East and not so much in the US.
Ultimately, while we recognize that our recommended solution is not 100% perfect, it is still a pretty viable option. In order to improve the status quo with CPB's involvement currently, we would like to recommend the following. A, we encourage CPB to reach out to more than just 1,500 news outlets, think 2,000 or even 3,000. B, we recommend a greater allocation of funds to CPB from the federal budget because $445 million is not sufficient. 3, we would like to endorse equal distribution of funding amongst all news outlets that CPB has reached out to. And D, we express hope for a system of checks and balances that will prevent government manipulation of media in the near future. With these specific recommendations, we hope and wish that the issue of biased news can gradually be resolved one step at a time.
Thank you.
For watching.
Okay, the first question is for you, Jacob. How did the group decide to include Danielle's perspective, lens, or conclusions into the overall presentation?
So our group, we decided on kind of splitting it up, as you saw earlier, into 3 different main categories, specifically 2. And so after we had completed our individual research reports, we kind of just came together as a group and we talked about what specific media outlets we focus on in our reports, and then we noticed that Danielle and I, we had both discussed news. I had talked about illegal immigrants and ethnic minorities, and Danielle had talked about due process and rape cases and such. And so we kind of incorporated that into one specific part of the presentation.
Thank you. This one's for you, Michaela. Give one specific way that your thinking has changed as a result of learning about Jackie's findings.
Well, as I went through the process of this presentation, I learned through Jackie's perspective that this issue is so much more complex than people put it out to be, and that it's not a topic that's commonly talked about, but it should be, which is something that I learned along the way of my presentation, our presentation.
Okay. Danny, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
I would say Javier's. Because it blended well with the rape content in a way that just made it more sensical, in that we were both focusing on people being villainized by the media, and it just helped to see another example of that happening.
And Jackie, in the future, what change would you make to your group norms, and how would you expect that to improve the team presentation?
Well, initially we had decided to focus on mass media in general, which was a pretty broad scope, and so by the time we had decided to start our presentation, we narrowed it down and honed it to just news outlets. So going back and reflecting upon the research phase, I kind of wish that we had narrowed down our research scope, just because that would have helped our argumentation skills a lot more. Also, I realized that a lot of different people work at different paces and that we're all really different. And that's something that I've come to respect and appreciate, which is not something that I probably would have said a week ago, but at this point I'm just really glad and really thankful for everyone.